The KU in Kugel now stands for something. Riley Kugel has committed to Kansas as the Jayhawks have their first offseason splash for 2024.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can give me a follow on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, and thank you for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we are going to be talking about Riley Kugel, who is the guard/wing transfer from Florida, who is now on the University of Kansas. And Kansas has their first splash, their first edition of the offseason, their first movement of the offseason headed into the 2024 to 2025 season. So we'll break it down. Who is Riley Kugel? Information on him, how he fits KU, and the impact for KU. Does this affect how they would go after other targets, other players? What does this mean for guys like Zeke Mayo and Liam McNeeley? All on today's episode of the show. But first, today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase with GameTime. So we did an episode actually just on Friday, which was kind of a deep dive on Riley Kugel, and we went into the scouting report, who he is and stuff. Highly recommend checking that one out. And if you're an everydayer, you already did check that one out, so thank you for doing that. We're going to go a little bit more over that and go a little deeper on some certain stuff with Riley Kugel here with his addition to the University of Kansas. He is a 6'5" guard/wing from Florida. Now, I mentioned this, that I think on one of his 24/7 profiles, it has him as a point guard, like another has him as a shooting guard. He even played the 3 and a little bit of 4 minutes for Florida in his freshman season. So realistically, he can, if you have to, slot him in 1 through 4, but I think realistically for what Kansas is going to ask of him, he'll be a 2 and a 3. So he spent 2 years at Florida, University of Florida. He came in as a top 60 recruit nationally. So this isn't just a kid who just blew up lately, like he was a high-level recruit coming in. He's going to have 2 years left to play, which that's always nice to have. And we've actually seen a lot of success of transfers in year 2. Like in year 1, transfers had success, but really the year 2 guys, like Texas made the Elite 8 with a bunch of year 2 transfers a couple years ago. Tristan Newton, he had a good enough year to win a title in year 1 as a transfer, but he's been, All-American level good in year 2. So you see this all the time. So that possibility is nice, though I'm sure from Riley Kugel's perspective, he wants to ball out good enough in his 1 year at Kansas that he can go off to the NBA. And if he plays that good enough and plays well enough, I guess I should say, in that time, then I think everybody would be totally happy with that. But apparently he spent some time growing up in the Overland Park area and was actually a KU fan. He actually posted on his social media, on his Twitter, pictures of him like as a kid wearing like a Kansas shirt and stuff like that, which, that can never hurt and never hurts to endear you to the fan base, certainly. I had him when we were doing our offseason rankings. I officially slotted him in. I mentioned this on Friday. Didn't have him initially there because I wasn't sure the interest from Kansas, knowing that, hey, he had some struggles coming off the bench in terms of how he reacted to that at Florida. Didn't like that so much, that from the Kansas perspective, if they are interested, it means that they would have to be interested as a starter. I'll get into that in a moment, at least what I would think. It maybe doesn't guarantee it, but certainly from what I think from that perspective. And to where I was like, okay, is that something Kansas is interested in? So I didn't have him on there, good or bad. But once you found out Kansas was interested and he was in the Final Four, I put him on a tier 2, which tier 2 for me, tier 1, I was only secluding. There's very few guys I even have in tier 1 for any of the different positions, is that not just somebody who's going to come in right away and be a starter, but somebody who's going to come in right away and be like, you're projected to be like all Big 12 first team. You're projected to possibly be an All-Americans, like what Hunter Dickinson was last year for Kansas. So I am in tier 2, which I still viewed to be like, yeah, you could end up being an all conference player. You could end up being a starter. In fact, you probably will start, and you're still a really good player. And so that's where I had him. And his freshman year at Florida, 9.9 points per game on 46, 38, 66 shooting splits, including him averaging over 12 points per game in SEC play, over 15 points per game from February on of the season, and over 17 points per game in the last 10 games of the season for Florida that year. If he would have transferred after his freshman year, this would be a tier 1 guy, but it's just because tier 2, the production was down a little bit. Sophomore year, 9.2 points per game, 39, from the field, 31 from three, 70 from the free throw line. Now, that does include some highlight games. He had 25 points against Baylor. He had 24 points at Wake Forest. He had 22 points in a win against Auburn, and he had 11 points coming off the bench in their tournament game against Colorado. But of course, season was a bit tumultuous because at one point, kind of midway through, he did get sent to the bench. Florida was a better team this year than they were a year ago. They brought in some extra guard talent with like Zion Pullen and Walter Clayton, and for whatever reason, things were a little more inconsistent. I think Todd Golden maybe didn't love the I don't know whether it was an effort thing or a defensive thing or gambling on defense and going for the big plays more than just the basic plays or the inconsistent shot making because the shots weren't falling as much this year and you have other good guard options. And then it ended up him going on the bench about midway through the season. He had a stretch where I think maybe missed some games. I don't know if that was off the court disciplinary, not off the court, but not handling the bench issues well. There were a couple games he played like back-to-back where he had like 3 and 6 minutes. Those weren't great, but seemed to correct that by the end of the year. Again, he came off the bench in the NCAA tournament and had 11 points. And, he's a 20-year-old kid. Sometimes for a guy who's probably been like the best player everywhere he's gone, top 60 recruit, and then has the great year as a freshman at Florida, and then you're expecting to have another great year and possibly be an NBA draft pick. That can be frustrating a little bit, and maybe just a change of scenery is kind of what you need, and everybody needs to make everything happier. Because by all accounts, like I think sometimes we can get too caught up in the idea that, oh, this guy was a problem for the head coach because he didn't like that he was going on the bench. And yeah, in an ideal world, every player that you have is going to accept their role in whatever that ends up being and not cause problems for the coach or other players or whatever. At the end of the day, though, if that's your biggest problem, like yes, you want to get that work done. And yes, you hope that that's not the case in Kansas, and it might not even matter. He might be a starter and everything, but like, that's way better than having like an off the court issue, like you can still be a great person and just like once your competitive switch goes on, you do not do well in those situations. Right. And so, we know Bill Self actually likes it a little bit when players, like you go back to certain guys like Russell Robinson and Tyshawn Taylor and Frank Mason, guys who talked back a little bit to Bill Self in certain ways, that there is a certain line there that you can't cross. But like, as long as you're doing certain things well and you're being tough, like, I don't know, Bill Self actually does like a little bit of that brushback in a certain way. So this past year, what led to some of the differences besides that? Maybe it was more of a mental thing or overcoming, some friction here or there that led to the differences in the year. One of the big things I looked at, the amount of like contested shots, guarded shots he was taking, dribble jumpers he was taking was very similar from year 1 to year 2. It's just 1 year they went in way more efficiently than the other. This past year, he also struggled inside. He was in the 47th percentile, so basically about average in efficiency at the rim, but he was only 26th percentile in efficiency in the paint, where he shot just 31%. So some of the floaters didn't go down as much maybe this year. Defense was not great. It wasn't like horrible, but 35th and 38th percentiles from freshman to sophomore year per synergy. But he's a great athlete, and we're going to get to a scouting report here from The Athletic, which kind of mentions that, yeah, maybe some of the offensive struggles led to playing worse defensively. I think that if he can just be an average defender, that's kind of all you're asking for, because you have a good defensive point guard in Dajuan Harris, and you got a good defensive coach in Bill Self. You're looking for the offensive playmaking. I think there's a lot of comps you can make here to Wayne Selden. Right, Wayne Selden was even higher on the recruiting rankings than what Kugel is, but you have two guys who are like 6'5". Selden could play as kind of an off guard. He could bring the ball up a little bit. He could initiate the offense a little bit. For the most part, he was a 2 and a 3. And his last year there with Devontae Graham and Frank Mason, he's a 3. And he's a 6'5" power wing who's a good athlete. I think Kugel's an even better athlete than that, but the efficiency wasn't there the first 2 years. I think as you get older in college basketball, the shooting and the consistency, those are two things that get better. And I think that's something you're looking at, that Selden broke out his third year, his junior year at Kansas. And I think that's something you could kind of point to and expect from Riley Kugel. So, I mean, this is a huge high upside swing. You're kind of hoping to buy low on. Like it's the classic dip down that, you're expecting kind of the pop back up. And one thing I really like about this guy, beyond the fact that he has shot making potential, which this team needs more of, he has excellent athleticism, which this team needs more of. He plays up in big games, big game player. In 25 career games against KenPom top 50 opponents, He shot 41.4% from three. So this dude steps up in the key moment, and that's always endearing to a fan base. So this is from The Athletic, who has their updated like transfer rankings. He was ranked, I think, 45th, 46th on there. He said the 6'5" scoring wing is arguably the best athlete in all of college basketball. This is specifically from Sam Vecini, by the way, who does great work. No, I'm not exaggerating. Few players possess his blend of power, explosiveness, and coordination. He's built like an NBA player and moves like one. His first step is lethal. Many, including me, thought he had a shot at being a 2024 first-round NBA draft pick. And then it goes on to say, but man, he had the bad season. He was removed from the Gators starting lineup after 11 games. His shot selection and decision-making during that time were horrendous. He committed too many turnovers. And then his reads weren't good enough, which he let the offensive struggles affect his defense, though he at least brought more energy later in the season. And then it kind of finishes up here saying that they have Kugel ranked this high based mostly off the previous year performance, but his upside is tantalizing. And he said it would make sense for a big school to take a swing. So you can read the full blurb on that on The Athletic, and highly recommend checking that out and Sam's work and everything. But I made the Caleb Love comp on Friday's show that there's similarities, that Caleb Love had this. And I think for Caleb Love, it was year 2 that he had his great year at Carolina when they went to the title game. But anyway, he had a great year at Carolina. They go to the title game. He goes off in the tournament, decides to come back for another year, and it just doesn't work. It wasn't a great fit with the roster they had. Things dip off, whether it was, on the court, off the court, coaching staff getting along, but whatever it was, things just dipped off for Caleb Love. Then he decided to transfer, new change of scenery. Worked for Carolina. It worked for Caleb Love. It was a good thing for both team and player. Goes to Arizona, wins Pac-12 Player of the Year. Now, I know Caleb Love had a really bad Sweet 16 game, and that's not ideal, but he won the Pac-12 Player of the Year, and he helped Arizona get a 2 seed and a really high seed and make the second weekend, of which Kansas was not able to do. I heard another good comp from shout out Evan Riggs, who was talking to me about this, and he said Malik Newman, some similarities there that, Newman, it wasn't a great fit for him at Mississippi State. And, he had kind of underwhelming stats after coming in as a 5-star to Mississippi State. Comes to Kansas. At that point, you had to sit out a year as the transfer portal. And then he obviously, had a bit of an up and down year, but still solid stats, and then just went off in March for Kansas and is now a legend in Lawrence for what he did in March. So I think there's some similarities you can have there. And like I said, I think there's some Wayne Selden comps as well, just in terms of the career arc and everything like that. So I think for Kansas now, you have another guard. And the beauty of this is it doesn't pigeonhole you in any way. You can play Kugel at the 2, you can play Kugel at the 3, which means, do you want to add another guard? Do you want to add another wing? You don't have to be like, well, we just added this guy and he plays this position, so now we can't add this other guy too. No, it's like, okay, let's just add whichever one's better, and then we'll move Kugel to the 2 or the 3, whatever's better there. I expect Kugel to be a starter for what it's worth. I want to tell you why in just a moment, because I've seen a couple people, I don't know, this maybe is more of a vocal minority or something, be like, okay, I'd love him if he's coming off the bench. I don't think that's something that's going to happen. So let's discuss that, how he fits in with KU and the impact on the rest of the offseason for the Jayhawks on this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. This episode is brought to you by GameTime. Buying tickets to your favorite sporting event shouldn't be stressful. GameTime is fast and easy. It's an awesome way to buy tickets to sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They have killer last-minute deals on tickets with their best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you're going to be having. Flash deals, last-minute tickets. It's perfect if you're going to the Final Four or some other sporting event where, maybe you're having to travel out of the state. And normally you'd be like, well, I have to get my tickets before I go because I don't want to get there and then not wind up with tickets. I'm telling you, if you use GameTime, you're going to be able to, lose that stress and probably get tickets cheaper than what they would eventually be. Snag the tickets without the stress with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Okay, so how does Riley Kugel fit in with Kansas? Well, as I was kind of talking about here, I expect him to be a starter. Now, whether that's starting as kind of the 2 guard or as the 3 guard, I think kind of depends on A, decisions like what is Johnny Furphy going to do? B, decisions of what else is going to happen in the transfer portal in the offseason. Guys like Zeke Mayo and Liam McNeeley and some of these other targets that we've kind of talked about, what's going to happen there and where do the chips lay. Now, I will say, I'm not saying that it's like a guarantee that he starts because I don't think Bill Self would really guarantee it. Like, he really does want competition. He made the comment, I think it was to Fran Fraschilla, like, that they mentioned was during the Big 12 tournament, where he was like, he wants 8 starters for 5 spots. So from that perspective, maybe he's viewed as somebody who's competing for a starting spot. Regardless, he's going to be in the rotation. And also the plan when you brought in Remy Martin, who had even more college production and more, college awards, I guess you would say, than Riley Kugel, was for him to start. He ended up coming off the bench for KU, right? So as much as I'm about to say this, I do know that there is a world where it is flexible and goes the other way. But here's my thing. Why would you bring in a guy, if this was your plan, a guy who, okay, he's really good athlete, he does all these things well, but the knock that went against him, the thing that caused him to have problems this year at Florida was that his role got diminished and he came off the bench, and that he did not handle coming off the bench well. So why would you, in turn, if you're Kansas, say, you know what, this guy did not like coming off the bench, and he did not play as well coming off the bench, let's make him a bench player. I made this comparison on Twitter, so if you saw it, this will just be rereading it. But like, it's like the equivalent of this. Let's say you own a restaurant, okay? You own a restaurant, and you're looking to hire a chef. And you go to this other restaurant, and you love this chef. Everything you order on the menu, you love. You love the lobster. You love the soup. You love a bunch of the other things on the menu. But every time you get a steak from that other restaurant, you're like, it's overcooked, or it's not seasoned right. I don't love the steak. I love everything else. I love this chef, but I don't love the steak. And then you hire that chef for a position to cook steaks at your restaurant. It's like, why would you, like, don't you want to go and play into the strengths of what you're bringing on? So from that perspective, I guess I would just view it from Riley Kugel's perspective. He's probably going, wherever I go next, I want to make sure I'm a starter, because I did not like coming off the bench here at Florida. And from Kansas's perspective, they're probably going, hey, we need more athleticism and shot creation. This kid has a really high potential, and he didn't like coming off the bench. Well, let's bring him in and he'll start, So that's just kind of my take on that, and I think that makes the most sense. From the Kansas perspective moving forward, they still at minimum have 2 open scholarships. So there's still plenty to do in the offseason. That's at minimum. That's if Johnny Furphy comes back. That's if Hunter Dickinson comes back. That's, if Elmarco Jackson and Jamari McDowell stay. That's if all these things happen. They still have 2 open scholarships. And that's if Arterio Morris's scholarship did count to last year's team. If it didn't, you still have 3 open scholarships. Then if any of those players leave, it's 3, it's 4, it's 5 open scholarships. So there's still plenty of room for Kansas to add at this point, kind of in time. So I think on the court, it checks 2 of the biggest boxes for KU. If you were asking me what are the biggest boxes for KU to check in the offseason here, I mean, obviously this stuff can move because depending on who stays, who goes, all that sort of stuff, it's going to switch a little bit. But I do think the last game of the season added in a new box, which was like, you need more defensive versatility and perimeter defense. Yes, that's totally fair. But the biggest ones for me all along were athleticism and shot creation, tough shot making. I would also add shooting in there, which I think is separate from shot creation and making. Like, shot creation is somebody who can create a tough shot when like the shot clock's winding down, or in a one-on-one situation, an ISO situation, because it's hard over the course of a game. You're not going to be able to always just dice up a defense with passing and ball movement and stuff like that, right? You have to sometimes just be able to get a big boy bucket, So that's different than just like shooting, which is more of like spacing the floor and somebody being able to, sit in the corner and knock down an open shot. Like, those are similar things, but they're different. So those are the big boxes for me, really the 4 big ones. And he checks the athleticism. I mean, just heard the athletic scouting report, and the shot creation thing. And I think that's what he really adds, both of those 2. I will say too, though, he actually was excellent in corner 3-point shooting, 45% on corner 3-point shots last season at Florida. He makes tough shots. He can get to them, especially more his freshman year than his sophomore year. And I think the potential and the ceiling of what this kid could be, if you get everything clicking, I mean, he could be a first-round draft pick type of guy. He could be the type of guy who puts up 15 points per game. And yeah, Caleb Love won Pac-12 Player of the Year, like that. He's in some of those discussions, right? I think some of the biggest questions, though, it is defense. I mean, 6'5" athleticism, like, there's no reason he can't be a great defender. But as I point to the synergy numbers, 35th percentile as a freshman, 38th percentile in defensive side of the ball in his sophomore season. I think just the consistent shooting and the shot selection. I think a lot of times shot selection, taking bad shots too often, can result in inconsistent shooting and can result in inefficient play. And so year 2, he just didn't see as many shots go in as he did year 1, and some of the same shots. But a big reason why it really came down to one zone. Riley Kugel shot 21% on mid-range 2s last season. That is really bad. Year before, he shot 50% on mid-range twos. That is excellent. So like, it's not just that you saw a swing where like 1 year was pretty good, 1 year was below average. It's like one was like elite, one was like not very good, right? So what are you going to get? Is it going to even out? Is it going to go back to his freshman year? What are we going to see? You also saw just 28% on above the break threes for Riley Kugel. Keep that in mind. 28% on above the break threes, 45% threes in the corner. Think about that for a second. What happens when you're taking corner threes? More often than not, it's in the flow of the offense. It's ball movement to get you open in the corner, or you're standing in the corner and somebody left you and you got open and shot an open three. It's in the flow of the offense. A lot of times above the break threes are more so when you are taking like a contested three or a three off the dribble or kind of a, heat check type of three. It's above the break, right? And so it makes sense that for a guy who, you're trying to work on maybe the shot selection a little bit, the big difference and discrepancy there. So if he can hone in the shot selection a little bit, and which I think will be helped by having a pass first point guard in Dajuan Harris, who's going to set him up for better, opportunities and everything. This kid can be awesome for Kansas. And I think he brings a lot of fun stuff with the shot creation and the athleticism that this team was certainly missing. Impact on the rest of the offseason for KU with this move on Locked On Jayhawks. Fire TV is your destination for sports. From live games to highlights to in-depth analysis, Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have Fire TV. They recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brand, all for free. That includes all of us here with the Locked On Network and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences. Fire TV channels lets you dive into all the game analysis and highlights to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, whether it's March Madness, MLB starting up, NBA getting to playoffs, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. So what does this mean for the offseason for KU? Because I think it'd be easy to see and be like, oh, you're bringing in Riley Kugel. Does that mean Marco Jackson's going to transfer? Does that mean that Zeke Mayo is not going to be able to come here, or that one of these other guard, transfers that you like or as part of our targets or that KU is at an interest in, like they're not going to come because they got their guard? No, I don't think so at all to any of those, because first of all, I think for the most part, Bill Self is looking to play like three main guards at the 1 and 2 position, right? You play Dajuan Harris 30 minutes, you play your starting 2 guard, 25, 30 minutes. And some of those minutes can be at the 2, some of them can be at the 3. And then you have a backup guard who can play the 1 or the 2. And they get 15, 20, 25 minutes, right? And then you have 3 guards basically taking up the majority of those 2 spots. I think that's pretty ideal for Kansas. Well, if you have Dajuan starting at the 1 and Riley Kugel starting at the 2, well, then you have a competition between Marco and LeBaron Philon. Let the best man win, and the winner gets that 3rd guard spot, which is still playing, pretty hefty minutes. And then the 4th guy is maybe more spot minutes here or there, right? There's still that opportunity. I mean, from the perspective of, well, you can also play Kugel at the 3, right? If Kansas is like, hey, Zeke Mayo put Kansas in their Final Four, if Zeke Mayo wants to come to Kansas, boom, you play Dajuan at the 1, you play Zeke Mayo at the 2, you play Riley Kugel at the 3, and you have a ton of playmaking and shot creation from your guard positions there, right? And then if it's like, oh, Furphy wants to come back and Liam McNeeley wants to come to KU, then it's like, okay, great, we'll play Kugel at the 2, and we'll play 2 wings with Furphy and McNeeley at the 3 and the 4, whatever it is, right? I mean, there's so many decisions that still have to be made, from Hunter Dickinson to, I don't know who's going to be added to the team and all that sort of stuff. But my point being is this: because of Kugel's flexibility, whether he can play the 2 or the 3, if you're Bill Self, you don't have to be like, well, now we're just looking for the top wing, or now we're just looking for the top combo guard. You can say whichever one we deem to be best and that wants to come here between a combo guard or a wing, we'll add, and we can make it work now because we have the flexibility to do it in the lineup. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back on Tuesday for, I keep promising we're going to get to this big targets episode. We've done our wings and our guards, but news keeps coming out since then. So we'll get to it eventually. I'll put it that way. We keep having breaking news. It's not a bad thing, but certainly we will get there when we get there. All right, this has been Locked On Jayhawks. Still plenty more to come. Zeke Mayo put Kansas in Final Four. Cliff Omarui, there's some talk there about Kansas kind of heating things up a little bit too. So you're going to want to make sure you're subscribed and catching every show here and an every day or as part of Locked On Jayhawks. See you next time, anywhere you get your podcast or on our YouTube page.